Thank you for coming. My name's David Beals. I'm the Digital Scholarship Partner here at the Kelvin Smith Library. And this is our final Freedman Student Fellows Forum. We're going to be changing the student fellowships to a Freedman Scholars Program next year. And our Digital Scholarship Director, Kate Osmond, is going to talk more about that later. Before we get started, we have some opening remarks from University Librarian Yolanda Cooper. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As David said, I'm Yolanda Cooper, and I have the pleasure and honor of serving as the Vice Provost and University Librarian here at CASE. And I want to welcome everybody here in the room and those online. Contributions from CASE alumni Samuel and Marion Freedman and their sons Howard and Walter led to the initial creation and continued development of the Freedman Center for Digital Scholarship. The Freedman family have generously given their support and engagement over the years, making it possible for Kelvin Smith Library to enable innovation and provide support and expertise in the development of new forms of scholarship. One particular outcome of this generosity is the focus of this afternoon's event, the Student Fellows Program, which was funded through an endowment created by Walter Freedman and his wife, Karen Harrison. I would like to make a special acknowledgement, as I did yesterday, in honor of Walter, who passed away in August of this year. He was a huge advocate for the Freedman Center and a great thought partner. It was a pleasure working with Walter, and we really benefited from his input. Walter was also very engaged in the overall operations of the Kelvin Smith Library and participated as a member of our visiting committee. And he was a member since 2008, so he spent a lot of time with us. Walter will be missed by all of the staff, but he will stay in our thoughts as we consider the future of the center. For our program today, you'll meet this year's student fellows and hopefully gain some overview of their work with the Freedman Fellows this past year. You'll also hear of their partnership with the digital scholarship specialists that work directly with the fellows on their projects. Many thanks this year's fellows and to the digital scholarship team, the librarians from Research and Engagement, who have, I believe, worked together to do some of this work, and those who worked on the arrangements, and to this year's program coordinators, David Beals and Karen Oy. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to David so you can hear more about the forum and get things started.
Thank you. Our first Freedman presentation is from Michael Bailey Arafa, who is a PhD candidate in the sociology department and has multiple master's degrees, including a master's in education. And her work is on exploration and the power of words, exploring a journal collection using a variety of tools, including artificial intelligence.
So, hello, I am Micah. I am a PhD student, or candidate now, woohoo, in the Department of Sociology here at CASE. And I was very excited to be chosen for this project. This presentation will cover the initial scope of the project, and then what I actually did over the last year. We'll go with a short author bio, an intro to diaries, and then into the work I did using the Freedman Center equipment, AI, and Python. So first, I was unexpectedly given access to 75 years of diaries that spanned some of the most important events in U.S. history. Initially, the study was proposed as a life history analysis of over 7 decades of post-World War II diaries written by a woman raised in the rural Midwest, which document her daily life as a woman, wife, and mother. Life history research explores how individuals live their lives, including their interactions with cultural norms, institutions, social change, and how they make sense of themselves as individuals and the world around them. And to do this, I wanted to analyze the private diaries of a woman born just before the Great Depression in 1925 and died just after COVID hit in 2020. And potential paths, I thought, could include life transitions such as marriage or childbirth, role identities like mother or socialite, how she viewed and felt about major social changes like the civil rights movement, second wave feminism, and the digital revolution, and how her language changed over time. And while for this last year, I wasn't able to include 75 years of diaries, nor was I able to capture much of her life story, I have digitized, used handwritten text recognition, trained HTR models for 30 years of diaries beginning in 1945 and ending in 1975, and analyzed sentiment as it relates to socialization, illness, and weather for the year of 1948. Yes. So the author, this is a little introduction. She was born in 1925 in rural Ohio, where her ancestors were among the first settlers. She graduated college, got married, and moved to Cleveland, where she raised 2 children. She had a strong social life. She remained active in organizations, clubs, and church until her death in 2020. She was a leader in her community and church, organizing Meals on Wheels for over 40 years. Her diary spanned from age 20 to age 95, providing us with an extraordinary record of both ordinary life and major historical changes. Diaries. Diaries themselves represent the socio-historical location of the person who wrote them and connects daily life to a broader context. They're unique in that they're filled with details of everyday life. Meals, friends, weather, expense records, like you can see, along with historical languages. And on the left, you'll see a list of purchases from January of 1948. I hope you're able to see a little bit of them. An oil change that's nearly 10% of their $54 rent, lunches for 30 cents, and groceries less than $2.50. And then on the right, the author writes about cleaning the house, sewing and ironing, and swimming before picking up her husband. She does her nails and meets another couple and some friends at the long-closed Old Vienna restaurant in Westlake for dinner, and then heads to the Great Lakes Theater in Lakewood to see Moliere's The School for Wives and Chekhov's Marriage Proposal before returning to the other couple's house for a drink. And now we'll move to the work I did on this project with the Freedman Center and David Beals. So this is an overview of the rest of the presentation, which covers the work I did during the last year. So my first step was to digitize or scan the diaries into images. And this was an image like per day or per 2 days. I then ran those images through a platform called Transcribus that is known for its user-friendly AI-powered handwritten text analysis. Continuing with Transcribus, I began training a text recognition model or handwriting recognition model based on the author's cursive handwriting. And finally, David Beals helped me get started with Python, where my only goal at the time was to analyze something and make it look pretty. So being awarded this fellowship opportunity and getting to learn at a prestigious university like Case with unwavering support was an amazing opportunity. Digitization. So I digitized 30 years of handwritten cursive diaries using a book scanner in the Freedman Center, the PlusTech OpticBook A300 props. So I began chronologically with the first diary from 1945. While this was super time-consuming and a little humiliating, as I did throw my shoulder out just like putting down the top of the scanner, it was pretty easy. But in the beginning at the Freedman Center, I'd find myself sitting down and instead of scanning, just like reading through the whole diary. But it was fascinating. Of course, most everybody has done a scan, so, you know. But my kids and I, soon after this project started, as might be common for some of you, started trading illnesses. And there were large chunks of time where I was unable to even leave the house. And so I didn't know when I could get back to the Freedman Center, so I ended up hiring an undergraduate to help me scan. Not only was she reliable, but she scanned in like half the time I could, and I don't think she got hurt, so yay. And so the fellowship that began in September was already a few months in, or several months in, so I eventually stopped the digitization after 1975. So the next step was HTR, or handwritten text analysis. And if you're familiar with OCR, or like just reading a document reading a PDF and like being able to highlight something and take a note, that's what they call OCR, which is optical character recognition, which is just a recognition of pixels and like where they belong on the page. But HTR is AI powered. It's used on handwriting pretty much. And this is really fascinating, and it's really top-notch science because, of course, everybody has different handwriting, and even if I look at 1945 compared to 1946, it's different. So it's really something else anyway. But it works like this, and I use Transcribus for that. So it works like this. First, you take the images that you've scanned, you upload them into this platform called Transcribus, or there's other AI platforms, but this is the one I chose to use. As a free member, you're given 50 credits per month to use, and then for each individual scan, you want to do HTR on, it costs 1 credit. And after that, I'm sorry, hold on, just a second. After that, you'll have some sort of text recognition outcome, which honestly, I thought it was going to be great, and it is, but it isn't very similar to handwriting at all. And I really assumed that I would run a scan through HTR and it would basically copy what she wrote and put it in print. But that was not the case. When I saw the first outcome, I realized that for every single page that I did this to, there'd be an additional like 30 minutes spent on manually editing the layout, the text, and tagging everything I thought was important: people, places, organizations, text that I thought was illegible, unclear meanings, on and on and on. And then, of course, when I was tagging, I was like, ooh, this is interesting, let's just look at it on the internet. And then I would find it and then be able to tag that, which was very useful, but, of course, that went into the 30 minutes of time it took to do all this. And then again for the next time, and then the next page, and then the next page. And so using Transcribus overall was pretty user-friendly. I was able to hop right in, upload an image, and see what happened. The editing wasn't difficult. It was just super time-consuming. But the staff are friendly, and they're quick to respond via email. But of course, there were a lot of challenges with the platform. And understand, I can't compare this to any other platform because this is the only one I've used. But here we go. So you get 50 credits a month if you're using the free version, and I was. This slowed my progress tremendously. It made every single mistake I made very costly. Everything run through the recognition cost anywhere from 0.25 to 1 full credit. 15 credits a month put me into ration mode super quickly, and it made things really hard. Once I thought I understood something or a process, I was out of credits and had to wait until next month. And oddly, because this is an online platform, I didn't find any helpful online communities or information, which made editing decisions way more stressful, forced me to make choices I really didn't have the knowledge or wasn't prepared to make, like whether a plus sign should be edited to an ampersand when it's clear she's using it for the word and, right? Or how to deal with her own editing, like when you use the little carets in editing and there's some writing up there. And the help section on the site was also limited, and it was difficult to search. As a complete noob, I didn't know the terminology to search for, or the information I read didn't apply to the specific work that I was doing. The help guides did give a general explanation of how to get to the point where you can train a model, but again, because it didn't say specifically how to handle collections that spanned this many years, and I'd never done this before, I didn't really think to ask, how do I do something like that on a collection this large? Because the basic instructions were there. So I started from the beginning, because I thought, well, let's start from the beginning, with the first 1945 diary. And I assumed this would be quick, but it was not, and I just want to give you a quick example. This turned out to be my biggest mistake in Transcribus, starting from the beginning, because look at this layout. Transcribus didn't know how to read it. I had no idea how to fix it. It was kind of a nightmare. But looking back, of course, now that I have experience, I should have started with a diary that had a much less complicated layout, because going through this journal, again, was a nightmare. I spent way too much time, too many credits, way too much of my sanity trying to learn how to manage and recognize this stupid layout before realizing that I could focus on that later and then come back when I had a little bit more knowledge under my belt. But so because with an end goal of creating a text recognition model that could read 75 years of diaries, I should have been transcribing and editing about 10 to 15 pages per year to ensure changes in handwriting, language, and tags show up in the model across time. But of course, sorry about that, I didn't know until I asked. But of course, I didn't know until I asked. And like I said, with any handwritten text recognition, there's going to be a ton of manual editing. And with this specific diary, I had to delete each line, letter, and number from the entire calendar at the top of every single page. But now I know there's a way to select this entire mess and remove it completely from recognition. But of course I didn't know. It was super tough. But the good thing is that after I did this, everything else seemed way easier. Yeah, and so because I was spending so many credits trying and trying again on just a few pages, I ended up applying for and was awarded a scholarship from Transcribus to cover the entire 75-year span of diaries in addition to a feature on their website. And after that, I was able to breathe a little bit because I have anxiety. This doesn't, I mean, the LeChon part was prettier. But as I began to realize how time-consuming this work was and how quickly this forum was approaching, I asked my friend LaShawn, who had been fascinated with this project since I began, to help edit and look over every single edited page to ensure there were absolutely no mistakes, which was necessary to train this HTR model. We were only a few hours into her working with the data when she started asking questions about choices I'd made and ones I hadn't considered, like, what if we tag this way? Why are you editing some hyphens like this and some like that? Maybe we should make a comment about the weight of our handwriting. What if that signifies high emotion statements? If the pen changes color in the same entry, what does that mean? What should we say about that? Do pen color changes mean it was a choice, or does it mean the pen ran out of ink, or maybe that she added the text the next day? And honestly, I hadn't even thought about any of this because I was so deep in the woods of trying to get it perfect that I didn't question anything that I was doing. And why didn't I, though? Because I'm supposed to be a qualitative research scholar. Like, why didn't I notice these? Why didn't I feel it important to document them? The questions of pen color or heavy handwriting didn't occur to me. It was interpreted as unimportant. And in qualitative research, many researchers recognize themselves in a position of power and consider a person's words and narratives as truth. But when we're watching or recording them, we must be aware, because when we're watching or recording them, when we're doing interviews and things like that, we must be aware of the influence that we have over the truth they choose to share. And so in this project, I naively assumed that since I wasn't there, like, she had already died. So I was free from that, right? Like, there was no power here. But Dr. Mary Erdmans, who's in our program, she's a qualitative sociologist, she'd always ask, what's missing and what are they not saying? And so I came into this project thinking that was a question I should ask about the author, because obviously she's a woman in the mid-20th century writing a book about herself that surely could have been read by her husband or anybody else close enough to find it. And I was asking myself, what is missing, because of what she's not saying, right? I assumed by being aware the author would leave things out. I'd have to read between the lines as if I'm solving some mystery. But knowing the possibility that the author couldn't write what she wanted, why didn't I consider, for example, that she could express what's missing through a heavy hand? So when LaShawn began asking questions, I realized I hadn't even thought about the power that played out in my editing choices of every character, every word, and every line she wrote. And I had to ask myself, how are these choices that I'm making changing her voice? How will her voice be interpreted now or 50 minutes later, or 50 years, minutes, okay, but also years later if I'm not asking myself, what am I missing and what questions am I not asking? And without LaShawn, I wouldn't have been able to step back and see the things that were and were not happening that I was missing. And so while reflecting, we came across this, a perfect example of the overwhelming number of choices I had to make that seemed little insignificant and the role I had in shaping the author's voice. So this is one of her entries in 1948. Hyphens and the word insertion are circled. And so she frequently used hyphens as semicolons or periods along with correct usage in the middle of words and word breaks across lines. And the hyphens were really hard because I wanted to be true to who this woman was, who seemed to be somebody who took their writing very seriously. But LaShawn had many questions about these. And all I could do is answer like I was trying to interpret them in a way that accommodated the visual character spacing that was necessary to increase the odds of training an accurate model. But truthfully, I hadn't even considered it because I just found myself transcribing all of this in the way that made sense to me while I was reading it, right? Like when you read a book, you think you have an idea of what the characters look like, but then all of a sudden it's turned into a movie and the characters don't look anything like that. So there's your interpretation that's different from the director's interpretation that may be totally different from the author's interpretation at the beginning. So working with LaShawn opened my mind to all these questions and how I viewed the author. And so even though I'm using content written without my knowledge, without my input, even the most meticulous editing that I can do will put me in a position of power. Even my interpretation of how she uses hyphens may completely alter the meaning she intended in the first place. So then I went into training the model. As LaShawn and I continued to finish more pages, I was able to start training models. So the more pages you've edited and tagged, the better your model is going to be at reading the rest of those pages. So in this work, you take your pages that have been run through HTR and have been looked at and edited over and over for hours and hours. And when they're edited as best they can be, then you save them as what is called ground truth files to create a training set. And these files are then used to train a model for the specific handwriting you're trying to recognize. Together, LaShawn and I ended up manually editing approximately 300 pages with just under 100 that I felt comfortable labeling as ground truth. So when training a model, you should strive for an error rate as below 10% as you can, which means for every 100 words, for every 100 characters, about 10 of those are going to be incorrect. So my first models, as you can see, had error rates of around 12 and 10%. And at times, I was seriously just throwing spaghetti against the wall. I wanted to punch a wall also. And sometimes I was including pages that I didn't even think should be in ground truth files just to see what would happen. And of course, this required me to buy more credits, which was expensive and super scary. I ended up getting to 8% at one point, but it was done with frustration, not fascination. And along with the 8% error rate, it just felt really wrong. But within 10 days of being awarded that scholarship and putting my head down because I had more credits, I created my best model. My training set was 77 pages, 7 used as validation pages, meaning that's what the model tested itself against to ensure accuracy. And this model used just under 14,000 words, 2,500 lines, with an error rate of 5.48%, which means For every 100 characters, only 5 or 6 will be incorrect, and about 94 characters will be accurate. And this was great. I immediately began crying. I was super happy, but also completely exhausted. And in comparison, the handwriting model from Transcribus that I had been using previously had an error rate of 5.1%, but had a training set size of over 2 million words and over 325,000 lines. So at this point, I was ready, boy was I ready, to move from transcription into analysis. This is the easy part, right? Yeah, well that's what David said. David said, you've done all the hard work. Now the Python's just gonna be super easy. And I was like, okay, that's great. I'll be able to analyze this like that, yay. So my mentor, David, set up a GitHub repository based on the 30 years of text files that I had been able to export from Transcribus. Using his work, I was able to start playing around with the language and see if I could come up with something. I didn't really know what at the time, and because everything had been so time-consuming, I decided to go whole hog on 1948, which happened to be the first diary with a simple layout, just to try to find something to show. In my self-critical brain, unless I could show something, did anything even happen? But what I realized in looking through this data was that I didn't really know how to find my initial points of interest, like role identity, life transitions, gender roles, because people don't typically write, I went to a PTA meeting because I am a mother, or I wash dishes, which is a gendered act. And so I realized, like, in order to get there, I would first have to learn how to analyze her mood, which is something David had repeatedly said, you should do sentiment analysis. But I didn't really know or understand what that meant. But anyway, I did some sentiment analysis. So, listen, my background is like a 1996 Pearl Jam album. And while I've taken several workshops on R, I was always intimidated when going off myself without the instructor's downloads. I was already intimidated by Python, as I'd heard it described as the language of mathematicians. I'm not a mathematician. So having David's code right next to me, on the screen next to me, was so reassuring because I could type in letters just like this, one by one, and ensure my spacing was right. All my loops were closed. I didn't know what loops meant, but just by looking at his code, I could just copy him. And so I initially attempted a thematic analysis, but quickly found that I didn't need to find one because I'd read this year so many times that I already knew what they were. People, illness, and weather. That's what kept coming up. Nearly every day, and often several times a day, she mentions visiting, having drinks, hosting, going to parties, or out to dinner with a dozen of her closest friends. The second theme, illness, came from her frequent mentions of she and her husband's health, conditions, bad colds, doctors, headaches, having the flu, or staying home because of a bad cough. And weather was easy. She described the weather nearly every day within the first couple of lines of an entry. So I began trying to explore the relationships between people, illness, weather, and mood, or sentiment. And for people, I was able to take the people I'd tagged from 1948 to create the lists and counts. For each tagged person in a daily entry, that's 1. Some days there'd be no tagged people, and for others it would be 10. So I quickly found out that people wouldn't cut it, as I was simply looking at counts and values. So if she mentioned her husband and the same friend 20 times, that's 20 points. You know, that's 20. So it would count every single one of those names as unique, which that didn't make sense. And I tried to fix it, got way over my head, and decided that's not the way to do things. So I thought about why I was looking at people in the first place, and realized it's because she loved to socialize. Throughout the diaries that I'd skimmed, her social life was always really strong. So I got rid of people, and I created a category for socialization. Unfortunately, when doing all the editing work in Transcribus, I never thought to tag words or phrases that meant socialization or represented it at all. Unless she'd written about an organization, a place, a major event, it didn't show up. So I had to create a word list for it. I ended up looking through the diary, copying relevant words or phrases. I ended up with a list of them, as you can see here. Then I had to do the same for illness and weather, both of which were way easier. I had a better idea where to look and what to look for. So I looked through every diary page in 1948 and listed as many as I could. However, I then realized that all weather was counted similarly, which meant that if there was any mention of any type of weather, it would go into the count. It would just be counted. So some days sometimes it'd be 12, and then the next day it'd be 12, but one day would be sunny and the other day would be miserable. So I knew that from reading from her diaries that anything cold or snowy or slushy, she hated. It limited her social life. It kept her indoors. She couldn't stand it. So I separated it into good and bad weather. And so now that I had the list, I was ready, right? Good. So for sentiment analysis, I used TextBlob in Python to help with sentiment. I found a lot of information about it online that was really easy to understand. And what I did was I assigned what it does, let me rephrase. What TextBlob does, it assigns a sentiment score for every diary entry. I would explain how this works, but I really don't know. My only goal here, remember, was to show you something pretty, okay? But here, right, we can see the relationships between sentiment and socialization, illness and weather, right? No, actually no. And this was one of the biggest stuck moments that I had. It was creating this visualization and looking at it and not immediately understanding why it didn't look right. I have an intermediate background in statistics, and I looked at this and I was like, well, I don't know what's going on. The line for the sentiment is at the very bottom of the graph. It's nearly straight across, but everything else is all over the place. Because at one point, sentiment might be through the roof, positive, but since socialization, as an example, is also through the roof, socialization is just going to hang out, or socialization is going to dwarf the sentiment line, which just hangs out at the bottom. But when I finally understood, I assumed that since I'd been in all sorts of rabbit holes, a lot of very, very, very deep rabbit holes with this project, that my brain just took a second to understand what I was seeing, and by second, I mean a few hours or maybe even a day or three. But it says right there, it says count. Counts need to be standardized to mean anything. So I let myself have a cry, a few or maybe even several cries, and I went back to work. I had already stayed up all night for several nights, tweaking every single line in Python to move forward to the next thing, which I had to tweak for several hours to move on to the next thing, just to get something to show, but it was never right. So for this, I felt so close that I could not stop until something was right. So I needed to standardize illness, weather, and social counts into z-scores so they could be compared to sentiment scores. And instead of just asking a stats friend to do it, which I totally could have, I just did it. I'm not going to tear up or anything when I say that I standardized counts into z-scores with Python, which felt totally insane because, how did I do that? I have no idea. But then the visualizations, they didn't look right. And why didn't they look right? And this actually felt way more insane to have been able to do all this work in Python, something I'd never touched in my life, and come out with visualizations that looked awful because ew. But I kept creating them until I made something that looked good. And I did it. I finally got it right. Voila! Yay! So now, if you look at her social life, you can see that when that line goes up, so does her mood or her sentiment. And when the weather is bad, her mood tanks. And the same for illness. And those relationships from her 23rd year of life plotted onto this graph follows the literature exactly, which says your mood goes up when the weather's good and the friends are great, but when the clouds hit and that cough sets in, your mood tanks. That's what it's like for most people. And well, I'm just so proud of that up there because though everything I did used tools and I learned things that I had never, ever, ever done before or even heard of, and I had faced so many challenges with funding and illness and life that at the end, I was actually able to create something pretty. And I literally just handed this in yesterday, 4 days late, because I could not stop until I had this. So I want to thank the Freedman Center for giving me the confidence and the money to try something I'd never tried before. Well, a lot of things I'd never tried before. It feels really nice to have people believe in your big ideas. Thanks to Transcribus for the scholarship that allowed me to really get things moving. And special thanks to David, who assured me that, yeah, you can do this work. He remained chill when I couldn't remain chill, and he was always an email away. Thank you so much, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Micah, and thank you everyone for your patience. Our next fellow is Olatunde Akanbi, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Materials Science and Engineering, and he worked over the past year with Ben Gorham on a GIS project exploring sustainable agriculture and the prediction of nutrient flows.
Hi, everyone. Okay, thank you. Okay, so today I'll be talking on something that unites us all. If you have eaten today, can I see your hands up? Okay. Okay, if you've not eaten today, have you taken water today? All right, so a lot of times we think about food with respect to cooking, but we don't think about it with respect to production. So where is it coming from? What are the impacts on the water quality, the environment, the life, the nation? So that's why I'll be talking about sustainable agriculture through geospatial-temporal analysis and prediction of nutrient flows. So I'm a PhD student, material science and engineering. My master's in material science and engineering. My bachelor's in computer science and engineering from Nigeria. My area, spatial-temporal integration, modeling, cloud computing, data infrastructure, applied data science. I want to acknowledge the support of the Freedman Fellowship Center, access to the computer of the multi-core computer to process large geospatial data, and they offered the advanced tool ArcGIS Pro for geospatial modeling and analysis. And I want to thank Ben. He guided me in the ArcGIS Pro for modeling component of this research, and also even provided live and recorded trainings. And sometimes we're on call and it's like, can we record these so I can go back? And it actually strengthened my skill. So before this fellowship, I had no experience with ArcGIS Pro. Now, it's a skill I can confidently list on my CV. So I want to start with this. What is geospatial? Just because I've been talking with a lot of people. You know, somebody said I'm an electronic farmer. We talk to farmers and different people from different fields. What is geospatial? What's geospatial analytics? Is harnessing geospatial data containing location information to answer a lot of questions on what, where, when, why. So a lot of these questions, you need to look deeply to be able to answer them. So, and how are these data actually helpful for us to identify nutrient waste hotspots, to monitor environmental factors, check air quality, precipitation patterns, prevent eutrophication? You can look at wildlife, water quality, human health. So I'd always say geospatial is everything, all right? So, for example, looking at the image by the right, you could see this is dead zone. This is 2018. Over 6,000 square miles dead zone in the Gulf of America. Those areas, no living thing can survive there, is dead zone because of excess nutrient there. In fact, in 2023, it increased to over 8,000 square miles. So it's continually increasing. So we do a lot of big data and a lot of data collection from different sources, USGS, EPA, satellite images from Google Earth Engine, IBM EIS data. big data. So think about having pictures of the whole United States all at once every day for a whole year. So that is quite huge. So we have a complex environment to be able to look into what we're talking about. We are talking about the air, land, precipitation, crop, water, human activities. How do you want to bring these together to answer one question? That's complex. How do we solve agricultural problems with machine learning or AI? Or do we just go to farms and just plant? There is a big problem. According to United States Department of Agriculture, United States spends every year, annually, about $40 billion on fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer. And there is excessive application of this fertilizer. The challenge is that over 80% of the fertilizer are not actually useful to the crops. Less than 20% of them are used. The remaining get washed and spoil our water quality. And the water gets so bad. A typical example is Lake Erie. And with that, there is a lot of underutilized resources available from concentrated animal feeding operations. Those are places where you have animals, real animals. The manure coming from them, they're organic. Also, our wastewater treatment plants, they have a lot of rich nutrient there. At the same time, we import those fertilizers from Canada and from other countries and destroying our waters, contaminating the environment. But at the same time, we spend over $2 billion every year to dispose these. We call them wastes, those manure that we can actually use. So we need to think on turning this waste into wealth. How do we do that? We need to identify the nutrient hotspots, track nutrient flows with data and models, and close the loop by supporting farmers, protect the nation, and safeguard the aquatic ecosystem. In fact, safeguard our own future, because water that is highly rich in nitrogen, research made it clear that babies who drink such develop a disease called blue baby disease. The skin's turn blue and they can die, and we don't want our babies to die. All right, so it's a pipeline we normally follow. We get the data, we verify the data, we ingest the data into a compute system. We use a lot of processing too. We do spatiotemporal integration, and we do modeling. I'm not going to bore you with the first three, the downloads, because that's massive. We do that. I build a lot of virtual machines to actually do that in real time. In fact, there are some virtual machines that have been running now for about 3 or 4 months, and it's still running, getting the data, peak data. So I'm not going to bore you with that. All right, I'm going to go into data integration and exploration. So when you get the data, you need to clean the data, you need to explore the data, so there are different kinds of data. Some are images, some are point sources. When I say point sources, like CSVs, some are GIS related data like vectors. When I say vectors, like shape files. So geospatial data is actually complex because it comes in different formats. You need to have a geospatial integration skill to be able to bring them together to do something reasonable. Not forgetting, we are dealing with a very complex problem. So to close the loop, what we did is we brought some data together, and we're able to, this is at corner scale, the continental United States. The image at the left, the GIF at the left is monitoring corn growth every day with satellite images. So everywhere you see green, the corn is very healthy. Dark green, very healthy. Green, healthy. Yellow is stressed or drying. Then dead when you have something like pink. The same thing is applicable to soybean. So everywhere you see completely white, they don't plant that crop there. And this is a 250-meter resolution. We're able to do that, track crop growth and stress pattern. Because sometimes farmers, they see cheap fertilizer coming from somewhere and just say, excuse me, can you just give me this farmer's bag this? They don't care if the crop actually needs the fertilizer. They apply that, and in 30 minutes time, there is precipitation, there's rain. Everything gets washed off, wastes again. So this is going to help in optimizing fertilizer use. Aside that, you want to think about how to help farmers, to support farmers and close the loop. Yeah, we might be getting, okay, we want to reduce the imputation of fertilizer and use the organic ones, but even using the organic ones can also constitute excess nutrients in the water, right? So we want to see how to help farmers to optimize that. So we can do this for different kind of crops, but this is just a typical example. And we can see Ohio there. Those are the two major crops in Ohio, corn and soybean. Also, we need to also explore the soil nutrients at different depths or soil properties like the soil nitrogen. So the major cause of this excess problem in the water is nitrogen and phosphorus. And at the left is soil nitrogen at different depths. So 0 to 5 centimeter down. And if you have high amount of nitrogen already in the soil, should you apply more fertilizer? That's one. Number two is if you have high amount of nitrogen in the soil and your crop is not doing good, you need to think again, because it's not only because there is no nitrogen or no nutrient that actually caused bad yields of crops. Excess nitrogen also makes the crop bad. So sometimes when the crop is bad, farmers are in haste to get more fertilizer. Sometimes it's not more fertilizer, is a lot of things already happening in the soil. So at different depths. Also the soil pH, we'll be able to help farmers to be able to say, okay, this kind of soil will not be good for this kind of crop at this particular time. So assessing the accumulated nutrient surpluses to guide sustainable management, very, very important. Understanding vertical nutrient profiles helps optimize fertilizer use and will be able to prevent runoff. Now, let's come home. All right, so we talk about the US, and I like to come back home to Ohio. And let's look deeply. You know, you can be talking about United States, oh, US, this is happening in the US, but let's come home and see what is happening at home. And I was able to analyze the nutrient flow, bring some different data together to look at what is happening in Ohio. From elevation data, water don't flow up, it flows down, right? So if rain falls, you are sure the nutrients will be flowing down. That's one. We're able to get that from the elevation data. And also then you'll be able to see the flow, the river networks and how they are connected. And are there, so with this, I made this visualization. I'm going to play that. Can you see that? Okay, so everywhere you can see, everywhere you see chicken, they are rearing chicken there in Ohio. Everywhere you see hogs, pigs, and all that, we can see the amount of manure they're generating there. Are they close to the river networks? You can zoom in and see, okay, the amount they're generating here, and you can see the flow of the nutrients in the water around that place. You can type, so this data is from United States Geological Survey, USGS, combined with other data to be able to see how the nutrient is flowing. This for 2022. You can look at the elevation, you can check the CAFO, that is a concentrated animal feed operation, and have information about it and see the contribution of each one as this. So if there is a CAFO location near a particular water streams, you may not see that stream get polluted like the one that is just close by. Maybe if the elevation is there, like if there is a flow, immediately it just gets there, it just flows down. And these people, at the other hand, are having problem. Actually, the CAFO causing the problem is not even close to them. It's just because of how it is positioned, right? So, I move on to the data modeling. I'm working with high performance computing, and I'm also working with ArcGIS Pro. So the pipeline is work here, transfer to ArcGIS, from ArcGIS back, just working all that. So Ben introduced me to ArcGIS Pro, and he said, Latunde, can you try ArcGIS? There is some GeoAI on ArcGIS. I said, what? Okay, let me explore and see what is happening there. I was able to integrate all this data I just showed you with USGS sensor data. So United States Geological Survey, they have sensors that measures this nutrient. I'm concentrating on nitrogen every 15 minutes. And you can have the data 20, 30 years back. So as we are talking, it's taking the reading, all right? So I loaded the data, integrated data into, so I loaded that, integrated in the, with, on high performance computing, integrated that into ArcGIS Pro. Then I ran this AutoML tool for the nitrate plus nitrite pollution. So the problem with nitrogen is, if those who understand chemistry, so the way nitrogen occurs in different forms, in different formats, say it's nitrate plus nitrite here, I'm not a chemist, is ammonium here, in different forms, N2, N2O, laughing gas, it's highly reactive, all right? So ArcGIS Pro offers GeoAI framework. I was able to train the model. It trains the model automatically. Then you're able to tune, I call it technical term, hyperparameters, and be able to evaluate the model. The beautiful thing with this is it automatically selects the best model for you, generates a lot of outputs, and you are good. All right, so the prediction generates these, and this is different model. Right by this thing is the heat map, Spearman correlation of all the models it tried. Different types of model. Don't bore yourself with that, all right? So then the one by the left is selected the best the models and look at the RMSE. That is the root mean square error. Okay, let me just call it error. So the higher the error, the more bad it is, right? So the lowest error model is we are more confident with this. So it automatically selects from this, my model, example, as the lowest RMSE, and that was what we actually worked with. So looking at this, the results, this is how ArcGIS look and all that. So different features are used, like I said, in the training of the model, ammonium, oxygen, soil nitrogen, the animals around those sensors, how many animals do they have in those scaffold locations, the elevation of those areas, the amount of manure generated. Now, this is for 2022. With this, we can predict also, so I said it's every 15 minutes aggregated daily. Then you now have for every day for the whole year. Then you can predict for each position, each point, that is, for every point you can predict another one and see how close it is. So the graph by your right-hand side, the vertical axis is the predicted load. The one on the left, the x-axis, the horizontal is the actual load. That is the one we use in training and the one that was generated. So this line is telling you how perfect it is. And you can see our change in there per day is telling you how correlated the predicted load our prediction, how good that is to check how good our prediction is every day. And I think the lowest I have is 0.9. So, and some are almost perfect. Also, yeah, because I'm a geospatial person, I need to see, these are those sensor locations, right? The one by the left, yeah, is telling you, you can see how it's blinking, how it's changing, how the loads are increasing at different times. And you cannot actually really see the difference between the actual and the predicted loads because they are almost the same. So if you look at your right-hand side, this is telling you for every day, the actual one is the blue. If you don't look deeply, you will not see that there is those are the little errors in the prediction. Then the pink is the predicted one. So with this, you can see nutrient load peaks. This is Ohio during the summer, possibly lower water levels. And I think that is common. There are times in Ohio we get shut up of water because they spend a lot of money in the summer to clean the water. It gets excessively, terribly messy. So this is very high. You can see the peak around June, July, and the prediction is even so. So interventions could look into that period and regions with peaks. At the same time, you look at the sensors where they are located, the image by the left-hand side, you could actually really see the western part of Ohio. That is where major farming takes place. So the corn, the soybeans, you see the loads, but there is so specific thing. If you see, go down here, you see this sensor here is the largest. That is close to Ohio River. So there is a lot of these nutrients going into it. So interventions, we need to look deeply into this and see how to mitigate the risk and do the nutrient recovery. Takeaway. Geospatial temporal analytics and modeling enable us to integrate and analyze vast geospatial temporal data sets. Modeling nutrient movement will help to optimize fertilizer use and reduce the costs. I'm looking forward to a day when we'll not spend $40 billion on synthetic fertilizer. Modeling for mitigation with GeoAI that they just track nutrient flows across farms and across watersheds. And this is very helpful to support precise and actionable interventions. This has local and national impacts. So we're able to perform state level work. Then I showed you the analysis at the national assessment. We can come down, we can have interactive thing to be able to look deeply into what is actually happening even around your own house. All right, we're able to provide insight for targeted environment and possibly agricultural policies. So future direction will be to integrate additional data because those are not the only thing that's actually contributing to those excess loads of nutrient in the water. Actually also data from wastewater treatment plants after treatments. They run a lot of the remaining ones after treatment into the water too. So very rich in nitrogen and very rich in phosphorus. So we can extend our model to CONUS level or even the whole United States. Thank you. Question?
One of the issues we've had really dive into a really big data set. So what was it like having that be introduced so far into your project? Did it change anything?
Yeah, maybe because, like I said, my bachelor is in computer science and engineering, so I'm very handy with tools and software, so it was quite easy for me. So it's interactive. You can work with the plugins and you can work with the GUI, the GUI. So I work basically with the GUI. You load it. It's just to make some clicks. The data load the data, analyze, run, then go sit down. And sit down, watch things happen. So it has different ones. There's a basic one, there is the intermediate one, then there is the advanced one. I use the advanced one for this. I tested the basic one, the model was not that good. I tested the intermediate, not that good. I think for this kind of work, we need advanced. So I used the advanced one, and it was quite very easy. Keep eating.
Well, thank you very much. And our last presenter today is Walter Wexler, who's an undergraduate member of the history department at Case. And he's going to share with us a story to make their own technology and indigeneity in New England and Newfoundland.
Hi, everybody. I'm Walter. As David introduced, I'm in the history department. I'm a fourth-year student. Hopefully, I'll be graduating in the spring, all going well. And so I worked on this project with Shazo Beydoun, who's no longer here at Case, but she was very, very helpful as a research librarian for the first, 6-7 months of the project, so most of it. And so I want to start off, hold on, let me get my notebook. I want to start off by talking about well, why did I do the project? What are some of the applications for it? What was it for my own personal development in this sort of space? And also just some kind of wider implications. So essentially what this project is my capstone work, my capstone research, which turned into a thesis, which is a little bit of a broader scope than this. I wanted to distill it into a digital exhibit. Something that you would see integrated on a museum's platform. Museums use a lot of different digital tools to construct exhibits. One of them is ArcGIS Pro, but there are lots and lots of different tools. And I wanted to explore how somebody with not very many resources working with materials that are far away, mostly based online, digitized materials, how I could translate that into a digestible digital exhibit for somebody that doesn't have a background. So basically you could walk into this website much as you'd walk into a museum, but you're probably unlikely to walk into a museum that is going to directly talk about my topic here, which is about differential technology adoption amongst, in this case, two different native nations in the late 17th century. So it's not something that you're going to run into all the time, but these sorts of tools allow kind of democratization of easy information sharing as opposed to the, 40-page thesis, which is not something everybody wants to read. So I ran into a few challenges in this process. First, what kind of background is necessary? What do you need to provide so that somebody can go in? Because it's not like you're just talking to me. I can't be like, you can't ask me a question and I can't tell you, well, you need to know this. So I needed to think through this process of what information do I give a visitor so that they can take in the kind of core thesis. And what it ended up creating, and you'll see as I take you through the next stage of this, I'll take you through the exhibit basically, is that there's a lot that needed to be built up before I could actually go into what the project is about, which is about how do you see technology use as a way of interpreting colonial pressures and interpreting different nations' responses to colonization from within. So that was one. Another one is, and we'll go into this as we see, but the kind of audio-visual material, what can I actually incorporate into a digital exhibit? So and I spent a lot of time on this project looking at other digital exhibits, people have done around since like 2020, since 2019. Like a lot of museums made digital exhibits of their collections during COVID and this sort of thing, and that's kind of continued since then. And so, I studied these a lot. And I came to some conclusions that most good digital exhibits cover topics in the late 20th century, in the early 20th century, like throughout the 20th century, in the information age, like when there are photographs, when there is audio recording, when there is video recording, where there is oral histories, these sorts of things that can be integrated into a digital exhibit. What do you do when your digital exhibit is based in the late 17th century, where all you have are printed writings, printed books, and artist depictions, really? And so we'll see as we go through how I kind of dealt with those problems. And then at the end, I'm basically going to evaluate ArcGIS story maps as the ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS story maps as interpretive tools, as opposed to something else, as opposed to other potential solutions. So this is the part where this is the fun part. So I started out by just giving this kind of conceptual background, trying to set up so that people don't forget that this is also a thing about technology. So survival and self-determination in the face of colonization took many different forms. Colonial threats differed based on who was coming onto native shores, why they were doing so. Resistance looked different among different communities because their choices were informed not only by the nature of the colonizer, but also by their own pre-existing political traditions. Technology is one theater where we can learn about how this occurred. So what am I doing here, right? I have different priorities in putting together an exhibit like this. One of the main challenges for anybody doing history in this time period on this subject matter is, and this is a kind of central tension, almost all of the sources you're going to get have been either directly produced by European colonizers or have been modified or interpreted by Europeans since then. So, but the story is about Native people, as how they lived their lives in this very tumultuous period. And so how do you, one, actually do that work of interpreting that and trying to deconstruct, read against the grain of the sources is what the historians who write the books will tell you this practice is. So how do you do that, one? And two, how do you communicate that that's what you're doing to people who are reading your work? Because that's actually a big takeaway, that this is how some of this work can happen. So moving forward, we did some background on who are the Wabanaki, who are one of the Native nations. So I covered the Wabanaki and the Beothuk. So you have to say, who are these people? So, and I also wanted to focus on how did we bring this into the present day? Like, how do these, because a big thing in Native history is that Native nations didn't disappear. They're still here. And so how do I highlight that in this work that I'm doing, which is historical, which is going back over 300 years? So talk about the Wabanaki, who are, the Wabanaki is a sort of confederation term that covers at least 5 different nations today: the Abenaki, Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq. These are the nations that claim Wabanaki heritage today, but there are probably many more in the period that I'm covering, but they've consolidated over time because of the violence of colonization. Talked a little bit about lifestyle. So lifestyle goes into a lot of technology usage, so covered a lot of this here. And then another angle of technology usage is diplomatic posture. So I talked a little bit about how the Wabanaki basically took advantage of their position right in between, and we'll see this on some of the media that I put in, between English and French colonial powers, and how did they sort of exploit that colonial rivalry for their own benefit, right? And so now we go into a little bit of how I'm using this digital tool. We have, so ArcGIS Story Maps allows you to, insert images, insert video, insert all of this stuff. And so one of the things that I was able to do is put in a document from the Maine Historical Society, which is open for use, and integrate that in. You can cite it. You can even use this to just navigate on the internet, and if you're somebody who's viewing this, you can explore it and be like, oh, I'm really interested about learning more about, Glooskap turning a man into a cedar tree. What is this? Obviously, I'm going to give some background, but where did it come from? Who's holding this object? What else can I learn from their own things? So ArcGIS Story Maps can be a way of sort of integrating different institutions and integrating different collections into one work and allowing visitors to sort of explore those relationships. So you'll see that throughout. One way I tried to build in Indigenous stories and Indigenous lifeways was by actually talking about Indigenous history and oral history, mythology. Gluskop is they're called different things when they're translated into English, but culture heroes or trickster heroes, these are characters who are closely intertwined with usually creation stories, things like that. So I wanted to highlight one of these, and I wanted to put it in the context of work by a Native artist, Thomas Joseph, who's doing this in the 19th century. Because, you know, again, this is, I'm not Native, these sort of oral histories is not my story to tell, so I wanted to put it in through the voice of somebody who's already kind of authorized it to be told through the Maine Historical Society and through the people that he worked with during his lifetime. As we go on, again, you're seeing me kind of grapple with the kind of source space that I'm working with. This is an image from Kejimkujik National Park in Nova Scotia. These are petroglyphs, so they're carvings into rocks. They're very difficult to date, but these are probably from after contact. And so you have, this is one of the few sources where you have Native people who are carving their own stories literally into the rocks, because these aren't largely written cultures. Mi'kmaq, there's some argument about whether the Mi'kmaq have a written language during this period, but it's we can't read it yet, if there is. And then another way of doing this, I integrated using ArcGIS Story Maps embedding tools. This Passamaquoddy war song or trading song, it brings up this link. It takes just a little bit while to load, so I preloaded it. But it goes right to this, and so you can play this off of Library of Congress. So
Station port.
fast forward slightly. Here she goes. So I'll stop that, but obviously I can make this story known and it's available online, so you can look at it and get the whole thing if you want to. So in my process of being like, who are these people, I can share with you somebody that is singing their own songs. And that's a work of, you might call it salvage anthropology, that was done in the late 19th century. You can hear the recording quality. That's on an Edison cylinder, so that's on a wax cylinder that an anthropologist brought out to record. There's a lot of complex stuff because these anthropologists were doing this recording because they were assuming that these cultures would entirely disappear in the next decade or two, and so they were basically rushing to capture all of this stuff in the late 19th century, which of course these cultures didn't disappear. There are state recognized nations in the United States and recognized First Nations in Canada, but it does also provide us with some really, really incredible stuff from their lifeways in the late 19th century, which of course have changed along with the rest of society over the 20th and beginning of the 21st. So we'll move forward. I want to note on this sort of embedding tool when I'm kind of going through the work itself, but I also want to sort of touch on the different pros and cons of ArcGIS Story Maps as a tool as we go. What would have been so lovely is that if I could have this play within the story as you're going through. I think you run into rights problems because it's a Library of Congress thing, and I wanted to be able to make sure that that's cited and that's known and that path is there. So the best thing to do is to embed it within the story. So you have to leave the story to get it and then move it back in. So when you're working in maybe other contexts, maybe you can get into contact with these groups and work out a different thing. But for my purpose, this is what I ended up working with. So we'll go on to the end of this section where I integrated, this is actually a past project of mine from, I'm sorry, I'm maybe too close. This is a past project of mine that used ArcGIS Pro to demonstrate Wabanaki seasonal migration patterns, talking about, because a big part of this is how did people survive, how do people live. So I integrated this in as an interactive piece, so something that people are talking about a lot with digital exhibits is how do you interact. With physical exhibits, people are talking a lot about how do you interact with the exhibit space and how do you make that your own, right? And so this was one of my ways of doing that. So you can embed other online ArcGIS maps. And this is pretty simple. It's a timeline based on historic data sets from the beginning of the 18th century, and you can watch this go. And you can zoom in and check out all the different pieces, and this lets you go around. So this is sort of integrating interactive elements. We go through, we talk about the Beothuk, who are the native nation in Newfoundland. And I'm doing a lot of the same stuff that I'm doing in the Wabanaki section. So highlighting who are these people, what is their diplomatic posture. They're much more isolated from the Europeans. This is why it's a good comparative case. I emphasize this woman, Shawanditit, who put together a lot of sketches with the British in the early 19th century. She's often written about as the last Beothuk. It's not true, but most of the Beothuk aren't a distinct political entity now, but they've integrated into the Mi'kmaq Nation in Newfoundland. So this is something that I want to highlight when we're talking about cultural continuity. We're talking about who are these groups. The Beothuk are a very, very understudied native nation. So this is a difficult area, but we have her sketches. We have drawings from the early 17th century. This is something that I debated really including because this is obviously totally apocryphal. This is an engraving made by a European, and it's not a very good depiction of them, but it is a historic depiction of a real interaction that happened between John Guy and the Beothuk. So we go on to talk a little bit about the context of colonial encroachment, where I integrated a little audio piece, which I'll share this and you can look at it on your own, but it's a very embarrassing me attempting original pronunciation, which like historic English pronunciation of one of these sections here. Which is of a promotional piece. So this is me again wrestling with how do you work with these very limited archival sources. So I'm working with this basically advertisement for, hey, Europeans, go colonize Newfoundland because there's lots of fish. And so how do I make this a little bit more immersive, a little bit more engaging? Well, I record a narration of it. So as we go on, another sort of interactive piece, you can embed all these maps in a sort of map tour situation, a gallery. So you can pour through these different maps and get a sense of the geographic area that I'm studying, the different European colonial powers who are working here. And then we go on to the main colonial pressure in Wabanaki, the land of the Wabanaki, which is the fur trade. And so for this, I use an integrated ArcGIS Pro map, which is a map tour based on a collection of coins that the main memory network has, which are all originating here in the Castine Trading Post. They were excavated there, but the coins come from all over the world. And so it's a way of sort of talking about how native hunting, native European relations in this one part of the world is actually connected to a global network of exchange in the 17th century. So one way of bringing to life this like very obscured part of history, right? And so how this works is you can go through, you learn about the Baron de Saint-Castine, who is the one who's the European basically middleman between Wabanaki hunters and European merchants. And then as this goes, it zooms in on the different areas and you see the different images of the different coins. Again, you can bring this back to the main memory network. We've got Massachusetts Bay, we've got Amsterdam and Paris, which have a little bit of information there. You can go to Lisbon and then you can go to Peru. And then it pulls it back all together. So this is one of these sort of dynamic things that integrates ArcGIS Pro into story maps. As we go on to the last part, this is actually where we get to technology. So this is one of maybe the drawbacks of having this kind of exhibit in a digital exhibit format, because I had to give a lot of context before we talk about what's the impact. again, we come into this challenge of sourcing. So there's very few depictions of native people from this part of the world that are contemporary and accurate. So I can't do the exercise that I do with Nottoway, with like the John Guy portrait, because that's entirely apocryphal. It's not what the Beathuk looked like. But this is a pretty accurate depiction of a Haudenosaunee, an Iroquois guy. I think he was, I'm not going to say what nation because I forget. But he was living amongst the Ojibwe in the early 19th century. And so this is my way of basically using him as a way to interpret technology usage. So you see the mixture of deer hide, of steel, and I talk a little bit about how this would have shaped his work or his person. And then after you get that context of, hey, what does technology mean in this way, then we go on and we look at it amongst the Beathuk, and we look at it amongst the Wabanaki, this is with an exchange between Wabanaki and English fort commanders, and so you can read that and get through there. Again, we have another painting which is kind of decent. You can see the use of canoes, you can see the use of firearms, how these are integrated into colonial networks of exchange through the fur trade is something that I get into. In the Beathuk, again, we have this thing, there's very little even manuscript talking about the Beathuk and the English, and so I'm working with a lot of archaeological sources. So this is a photograph from an archaeological excavation of a 17th century home. So there's a few like layers of removal, but we're talking about it. And again, this is a piece of archaeological evidence. These are recycled iron nails that would have been like in European ships and then nailed into arrowheads and spear points and things like that. So as you see, like this is getting basically to the end of the exhibit. And so you see how I'm using a variety of different tools to get through this interpretation. So using a lot of maps, using a lot of archaeological sources, using pictorial sources, and if those pictorial sources aren't like in the direct area that I'm talking about, being very clear about that. Linking back to other archival databases that a viewer can go through and learn about, and then also incorporating these sort of interactive things that are through ArcGIS Pro gives a lot of flexibility and credence to ArcGIS story maps as a vessel for telling these stories. I think it's very useful. I think it's very seamless. It's pretty easy. This doesn't involve any coding. It's like very plug and play. So that's very helpful for historians or for whoever to put this sort of thing together. But one problem with it is that it's basically entirely linear. A lot of good digital exhibits allow the viewer to explore and go from place to place to place to place to place. But ArcGIS story maps is very linear. So this was basically my work. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was interesting.
Thank you to all our presenters today, and please chat with them afterward for those of us who didn't get as much time for questions. Just to end, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Freedman Student Fellows Program. So since 2005, the Freedman Students Fellows have supported the growth and professional development of Case Western students. This program is made possible through the generosity of Walter Freedman and Karen Harrison. And they, through this program, have shown the way that they value investing in early career researchers and giving space to fail, which is something I talked a little bit about with Walter last fall. A space to fail in a supportive environment and therefore a space to grow in resilience. And I think that you saw through all of these projects how much failure was learning and not a thing to be penalized. The next phase of this program is going to build on this foundation. It is going to honor what Walter and Karen's investment in the Freedman Center and Case Western. And we are going to transition the program to have students directly working with digital scholarship specialists on faculty, staff, and student research projects. The Freedman Scholars' first cohort will be welcome this spring, and applications are currently open. So if anyone is here or knows someone, please share. There's flyers in the back of the room that you can scan, and we're on Interfolio, which is how Case Western hires students. Scholars will be working in the lab. They will be developing workshops and tutorials. They'll be assisting with projects. And as they do this, they'll be growing as researchers. We will be preparing them to enter the workforce and to contribute to a more just and engaged society. So with that, I will invite you to apply. And also, can we have one more round of applause for our absolutely fabulous presenters? Thank you.